Our stories are related in many ways because the whole idea of central bank independence is also premised on the idea that, virtually all economists believe in today that central bank independence is a natural state of affairs. I don't think it is. And I think what people have forgotten is that, it's in most countries relatively new. It's sort of an idea the United States has had it for longer than other countries. But the Federal Reserve in its current formation only exists for a little over 100 years. And its independence is also enshrined in a much broader political goal set. I mean, it's not just about inflation. They also have to take account of employment. So it's not, the political goals have been given to the central bank. It can't just set its own goals like the European central bank do. Now, the big misunderstanding amongst economists and also amongst politicians these days who defend the principle of central bank independence is that it derives better results. And I don't think that is the case. The original idea for central bank independence in the 1990s, when a lot more central banks like the Bank of England became independent, the idea was not that it was better in the sense that it derived consistently better results. The idea was that since society agrees on the goal, which is keep inflation stable, it may as well give this goal, this policy to an independent organization to pursue this goal, irrespective of short-term government priorities. So it was more of a political idea than an economic idea. And you can defend this because, if society, on most political issues we disagree in society. We don't have consensus. It's very rare for us to have some consensus. But there may be issues out there on which we pretty much all agree. And, we may find that on those issues it is perfectly fine to devolve the authority to run the thing, not forever. You don't want to put this in the constitution, but you might just give it on, for a certain period of time, give it to a central bank and then take it back if this consensus breaks down. Now, this is what happened in the United States. There is no more this consensus of behind monetary policy. This consensus that we all agree on the outcome. Trump doesn't agree on low inflation. He says it, he talks about it, he campaigns on it. But if Trump cared about low inflation, he wouldn't do what he did to the Federal Reserve. Now, I'm not going to comment on the legal case. I don't know. These may well be invented charges, but that's not the point. The point is that in the United States, this consensus has broken down. And without that consensus, you cannot have independence because in politics, independence without consensus is tyranny. That's something we don't accept. Central banking, monetary policy, fiscal policy is all part of the same overall economic policy framework. This is politics. We saw it in the last decade. Central banks' actions, the quantitative easing, had distributional effects. It's politics. It shouldn't be run by independent people. And it should only be run by independent people if we all agree. If Yanis and I and everyone else who listens to this podcast, or most people who listen to this podcast, if we all agreed what a central bank should do. Now, I can absolutely guarantee you that this is no longer the case. We may have been more consensual in the 1990s and still in the early 2000s, but after the global financial crisis, that consensus broke down. And so what we're seeing here is a very natural reversal of this process. It starts in the United States, and I think it will come to a country near you.
I agree entirely, of course, that this issue, which sounds very technical, it's so deeply political. And indeed, the discussions that are taking place are not even taking place at a technical level. But allow me to make 3 points, Wolfgang. The first one concerns the use of the courts in public life. Now, lawfare is an appalling way of handling political discussions. It's a way of actually murdering genuine political discourse, replacing it with a kind of phony legalism. This is the Lee Kuan Yew type of politics, of persecuting your political opponents through the courts. It is terrible that instead of having this conversation in the United States on the merits of central bank independence, the Fed's policies and so on, we have this red herring of essentially the Department of Justice prosecuting the chairman of the Fed on misdeeds and the rebuilding of parts of the Federal Reserve building. This is appalling. But let us not forget that it was the Democrats that also practiced lawfare against Donald Trump. So it's not just that any consensus about the Fed has broken down. The consensus about how to do politics has broken down. That's, the first point I would like to make. The second one is going to the heart of the matter, as you were doing, Wolfgang. When we talk about independence from whom? Now, you made the point, and I want to reinforce this point, that who sets interest rates is a political decision. There is a clash, there is a kind of class war between debtors and lenders. You increase interest rates, you favor one against the other. You boost inflation, again, there are some winners and there will be some losers. This discussion, in other words, goes to the heart of democracy. And let's face it, very few people actually believe in democracy. The whole argument about central bank independence is exactly that. I remember, in the economics profession, as a PhD student at the time, I was exposed to a clear consensus amongst, especially economists, the demos cannot be trusted with electing representatives that will decide the priorities of the central bank. It was really very clear. Create a firewall between monetary policy and democracy. That was the whole point. Now, maybe they're right or wrong, but what I can't stand, Wolfgang, is the hypocrisy. These people who present themselves as liberal Democrats are effectively doing away with the whole concept of democracy. It turns out that from where they're standing, elections are a process by which a particular faction of the elite is being chosen to serve the interests of the ruling class. Should the public choose one of these factions to set interest rates that suit this part of the oligarchy or the financial cabal, which is another part of the oligarchy? Or should the bankers have more control in setting the interest rates that suit the oligarchy? It's a clash between different factions of the powerful, which is being presented as a discussion about democracy when it's got nothing to do with this. So it's not about competence. It's not about liberal values. It's not about democracy. It's a debate within our ruling class about which form of dependence suits it the best. And then they talk about independence. And one last point, if I may. All this is happening. You and I have discussed this many times before, and I think we will inevitably come back to that. This discussion is unfolding against the background of the privatization of the dollar, the sidelining of the Federal Reserve itself with the Genius Act. We're going back to the 1870s and the 1890s with private firms, tethered now, Circle, JP Morgan tomorrow, will be able to print their own dollars in the form of stable coins. We're going to go back to a situation where the money market was as free from any constraints that the public might want to impose upon them as they can ever be. Maybe, if I'm right in my analysis, we're going straight towards, a world of pure chaos like the 1890s, stupendous financial disasters, poverty that was totally out of control, mind-numbing levels of exploitation, insidious discrimination. That is the free marketeer, pseudo-libertarian dream that is being created by both sides of politics in the United States. On the one hand, the liberal establishment that allowed Wall Street to go absolutely haywire and then bailed them out with Federal Reserve support, and the Trumpists who are privatizing the dollar.
Let me make the liberal case against central bank independence. We are, without a doubt, ending a period of multilateralism. The golden age of multilateralism, I would date it from 1990 to about 2020. And it's falling on several levels. Central bank independence, and even though you're absolutely right, it's a very technical thing, it was absolutely critical to the success, to the way to the machine room of that period. Not just free trade agreements and so on. It was actually central bank independence because they set the sort of big macroeconomic conditions. If that falls, that will be a major defeat. The multilateralist thing was premised on something very similar. Multilateral institutions like the EU, like the WTO, are very much premised on the idea, how do we get around the politics? In the EU, in Brussels, people talk about how do we get around referendum. When the British held their referendum on Brexit, the first instinct was, how do we get a second referendum? It's always what the EU always did. Someone voted against something, then they had the chance to vote again, as the joke went at the time. The same mindset exists in in central banks. The Fed is one of the biggest employer of PhD-level macroeconomists. In Europe, that's the ECB. Imagine a situation, and that's very likely going to happen in the United States, where the chairman of the Federal Reserve will be a very different kind. We will probably get an announcement on that very soon by Trump. And for liberals, and this is coming back to what I was saying, if you wanted a functioning liberal democracy, you want to get away from these toxic, patronizing, ultimately undemocratic structures and create a liberal structure that is significantly more, has a trust in the electors, that has a competition policy, that doesn't deal with what you call about techno-feudalism. So it's a point on which you and I slightly disagree. For me, this is an issue of competition policy. This is not a problem of, if you don't have competition policy, then yes, you get some very bad outcomes. There is a liberal case for democratizing economic policy.
Well, that didn't sound very much like a liberal defense of central bank independence to me. It sounded more like a liberal discussion, a very good one, I have to say, of the problems that one has when one tries to sequester monetary policy and put it in some kind of different silo. Look, Wolfgang, the way I see it, it's really much deeper than that, the problem. The best of liberal mindsets, trying to create a kind of technocratic mechanism for controlling interest rate policy, ends up falling flat on its face, because all the discussion about central bank independence has been about interest rates. Well, what about supervising banking? Behind every financial crime, there was a central bank that turned a blind eye or actively supported it. And then the result is, of course, what happened in 2008. And then central banks, in order to maintain the pretense that they're in control, they do things like quantitative easing and bail out the bankers, essentially not safeguarding society from the collapse of its monetary system, but effectively rewarding the financial crimes that happened before. And at that point, the liberal mindset is totally short-circuited. It simply is facing a situation where it is damned if it do, and it is damned if it doesn't. Now, look today. I mean, today there is this discussion, I'm sure you read the New York Times today and the Financial Times. It's all about rule of law against the Trumpists who are weaponizing the courts in order to end this liberal, beautiful tradition of central bank independence and the Fed. The way I see it, Wolfgang, what we have is, on the one hand, we have Wall Street hedge fund managers like Scott Bessent, who have taken control of the Treasury, wanting to try their hand at controlling interest rates directly. And this is a clash between the hedge funds, the uppity ones, and their allies, the crypto brothers and the bro-oligarchy, the cloudalists, as I call them, who are very keen to effectively privatize the Federal Reserve through stablecoins. And on the other hand, you have the more traditional banks that support the original JP Morgan created Federal Reserve. This is the real clash between different factions of the oligarchy in a system which cannot survive without the central bank actually doing that which says it doesn't want to do, which is to keep bailing out failures.
Yeah, let me just clarify. I'm not predicting that this outcome of what's happening in the United States will be a positive one. I'm merely, first of all, stating that central banks' independence is ending, not whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm merely saying it is ending. The case for it, the consensus for it is gone. We don't live in a society of consensus, so it's a political thing, and that will become clear. What happens in the United States on your description of what Trump wants with the central bank, I would agree. The dollar will weaken, that's for sure. The cryptocurrencies will take a role there, and it will be a pernicious role, I think. It will ultimately be destabilizing. They will issue more debt. This is what the stable coins will do. It will give them the opportunity to issue a lot more dollar-based debt, while the dollar, the anchor, is depreciating. It's going to be bad. I think the outcome in the United States is going to be bad. I think Trump, I could see there will be sort of some energetic boost. I think one shouldn't predict the Trump thing will just decline in a straight line. I think there may well be some, the stock market bubble may, last another year or two, and it may look good for a year or two. It's very hard to time these things, but the sustainability of this is just, it's not in doubt that this is simply not possible and not sustainable.
And of course, what you described is catastrophic for Europe, because Trump wants the dollar to weaken. He wants more control of the dollar, but he wants it to be weaker, just like Richard Nixon did in the 1970s. And he's getting that. And you have, just to conclude our sojourn into central bank independence from a European perspective, you've got the world's supposedly most independent central bank, which is the European Central Bank, which I have personal experience of that. I have actually watched Mario Draghi when he was the chairman, the head of the European Central Bank in the Eurogroup meetings, demonstrate the complete lack of independence that he had because, when you have no federal treasury to support you and you have this ironclad system of rules of what you can do and what you can't do, and you have to bail out banks against your own constitution and bail out countries against your own constitution and to pretend that you're not doing it, believe you me, dear listener, that you're as far away from independence and power as you can ever be as a central banker.
Indeed, and that was also the story of the Eurozone crisis. We had a lot of delusions about central bank independence, also delusions about fiscal sustainability, fiscal rules. All these wonderful constructs completely collapsed and did not survive a real shock. And we need to sort of make up policy on the hoof with outcomes that still affect us today. I think, I would argue that much of the weakness we see in Europe today is very much the results of these decisions that we are taken. And another thing, where America is more robust than we are. America can change these arrangements and quickly. When the 2008 financial crisis happened, America recovered from it faster than we did. We put the central bank independence in our constitution. That's, I think, the madness of it. Central bank, and the UK at least put it into a law, and you can change laws, but a constitution is virtually impossible to change. So to put it into a room and lock the door and throw the key away is not a good sort of governance system, and it does not give us the ability to change policy when we need it. And an independent central bank in Europe, confronted with a non-independent central bank in the United States that acts politically, will produce some very poor outcomes for Europeans. Like in so many things, we could discuss Greenland and other things. There's so many things happening right now that could produce some really bad outcomes for Europeans because they're locked into in their old way of doing things, into their sort of ideological, European system, their sort of decentralized constitution, their voting systems. There is something about Europe that is very sort of stale at the moment and very, very rigid. That will make it very difficult for them to respond effectively to what's coming at them.
So in true iconoclastic ways, let us warn our listeners and viewers, beware those liberals who are supporting central bank independence and beware the Trumpists who want to bring it down.